As mentioned, my name is Dr. Simon Clark. I'm a senior research scientist at Sintef, based in Trondheim, Norway, where I focus on battery digitalization topics. And I lived in Ulm for 8 years before I came up to Norway and did my master's at ZSW in Ulm and my PhD at the DLR HIU. So I'm always happy to reconnect with people in Ulm and come visit when I get a chance. But today we're going to be talking about ontologies and specifically how they unlock battery knowledge to try to make that accessible to machine agents in the age of agentic AI. So a short overview of the talk, 4 basic parts. We'll begin with a background on agents, so we're all kind of on the same page about what we mean when we say that. Then we'll go a little bit into the basics of semantic technology and how that enables a lot of the functions that we'll be looking into later. Then we'll have a brief exploration of linked data for batteries, which ends up being kind of like the food that powers AI agents, and wrap up with a look to the future and what initiatives are underway and what we can look forward to in the near term and the long term. Good, so let's get started. If you follow the technology news, you may have noticed about a year ago there were some new buzzwords coming on the scene that would be things like the third wave of AI or agentic AI. And it's made a lot of waves, not only in financial publications like Forbes and the World Economic Forum, but also, the big technology leaders like Microsoft and Google really started running with this. And it may sound like kind of a new term, agentic AI. But what is that exactly? And what are we talking about? And why is it that can have such a big impact, not only on finance, but also on research and science? So when we think about AI, most people have experience with chatbots. So things like ChatGPT or Claude or similar things. And those instances are designed to be reactive and interact with users through a kind of flat interface. So basically, you ask a question, what is a good anode material for lithium-ion batteries? And the chatbot will give you back a response. But that's pretty much the limit of that interaction. You give it a query, it gives you a response, and you just go back and forth in that way. Agentic AI is a little bit different. Agentic AI is designed to understand the goals of the user, make plans, take initiative, use tools, and interact with other agents. So instead of being just a call and response style interaction, it's designed to complete complex tasks that require reasoning and inference and taking actions across different systems. So an example could be, evaluate if our silicon graphite anodes are suitable to reach the cell level KPIs for generation 3B cells with LNMO. And in order to respond to that query, the agent may need to query a database to get some data about your anodes or your cells, retrieve from that a data set, maybe interact with a second agent to do some analysis or processing on that data, maybe set up some simulations and run those on the cloud in a framework like PyBAM or BAPMO, and summarize those results in order to make a statement that either yes, this is suitable, or no, it's not. And implementing something like that and kind of realizing that vision requires agents to have an awareness and understanding of the different systems that they have access to respond to that query or to respond to that prompt. And they also need to understand the meaning of the data that those systems contain, as well as their exchange interfaces. So this is something that's, as we mentioned, especially starting from last year, became kind of a wave, became kind of a trend. And it's easy to think that maybe this is something new. Maybe this is a new idea or a new concept. And the truth is that if we hop in our Wayback Machine and go back to a simpler time in 2001, this vision has actually been foreseen and integrated into the structure of the modern World Wide Web, all the way from its close to its inception. Because in May of 2001, Tim Berners-Lee, who you may know as the kind of de facto founder of the World Wide Web, published an article for a concept of something that he called the semantic web. And what he found in the early years of the World Wide Web is that it's really good for linking documents and simple kind of hypertext markup. But that doesn't really tell you a whole lot about what the nature of those connections are. And it doesn't really tell you anything about databases or data systems or data sets that may be indexed in the web. So they came up with this concept for the semantic web as an extension of the World Wide Web, in which information is given well-defined meaning to better enable computers and people to work together in cooperation. And in the vision that they outlined, one of the key features in there is agents. We actually see it down there at the bottom. And we can define an agent as basically a software entity that acts autonomously on behalf of a user or another system using structured, semantically annotated data and web standards to make a decision and coordinate actions. So they saw this as something that can help people to coordinate across different systems and take complex actions. So when we start coming today into this age of agentic AI and all of the possibilities that starts to open, what we are really talking about is something that is powered by the intelligence of AI tools, which is really, progressing at extremely fast rates, but is supported by the structure of the semantic web, which has been in place for a long, long time. And when we think about that and say, okay, well, what's the next step that we need to take? We're talking about the structure of the semantic web and how this integrates with data. What exactly does that mean, and what kind of resources do we need to support that? And we don't have to look very far. Right in his original article on semantic web, right up top, Ontologies. And Ontologies, it was originally a branch of philosophy that describes the science of existence and being. But artificial intelligence and web researchers have kind of co-opted the term for our own purposes. And for us, an ontology is essentially a document or a file that defines some formal relationships among terms. So we use that to create a kind of shared conceptualization of things and knowledge that we can then create as a kind of layer, semantic layer, on top of the raw data and raw information that's included in the web or in databases. And the most typical kind of ontology that's used in web systems consists of a taxonomy, which is like a kind of dictionary or hierarchy of terms, combined with a set of inference rules that allow machines to traverse relationships and infer new meaning from those systems. So when we think about how has this been implemented up till now, and how is that supporting these new activities on agentic AI that are coming out today? Ontologies have been extremely well developed for many general knowledge topics that enable search engine optimization and linking data on instances like Google or Bing or Yahoo. But they've generally been kind of slow to reach technical or scientific domains, and that's kind of amusing because the World Wide Web was originally created at CERN in Switzerland exactly for technical and scientific domains. But that's how life goes sometimes. And now we have an opportunity to take those things that have been so well developed, general purpose knowledge, and bring them back to their original home in science and technology. So what is the outlook for agents in a battery semantic web? And what do we need to focus on in order to bring this vision to fruition? And I think it's fair to say that we have very good tools and infrastructure for humans to interact with machines. Of course, you know, we all know chatbots and the kind of very intuitive way that interface works. And I think that is just going to become the de facto standard for humans to interact with machines. If systems don't have natural language interfaces already, there's definitely going to be a demand to integrate that. So we can say, okay, we have good tools for human-machine interactions, but what is lacking is the back end. What is lacking is the extensive networks of battery data and tools that agents need to be able to work with. And just to kind of drive that point home, I'll tell a little anecdote. I was preparing a kind of similar talk a few months ago, and I was working with a PhD student, and I said, well, you know, let's look for the most common thing, like probably the most widely available battery material parameter, and see how much we can find. So asked him to look into how many data sets he could find for graphite open circuit potential profile curves that are published with the raw data and under a permissive license, so that we can integrate that into like a P2D model or something. And he searched for about a week, and he came back with 6. You know, six data sets for the, you know, what is probably the most common, one of the most common battery materials in the world. So there's kind of a clear lack of data that's necessary to power these things, and also the infrastructure that's needed to lay on top so that these agents can not only find that data, but also understand its meaning, understand its links to other things, and be able to work with it in an autonomous and independent fashion. Good. So if we take a step kind of into that environment, we can first look a little bit more into the details of semantic technology, so we understand exactly what it is that we're talking about and what we're working with. And then we can see how in practice this can be applied to battery data to start opening up those networks. So semantic technology is fundamentally methods and tools that attach meaning to data. That's basically what semantic means. Semantic means meaning. So when we think about how this can be implemented, as we've discussed, a lot of this was originally developed for the World Wide Web, and the W3C consortium maintains standards and recommendations that govern the nuts and bolts of how such systems are implemented. So World Wide Web sets the fundamental rules for grammar, which in ontologies and the language in which they're expressed, RDF, the foundational unit is something called a triple. And a triple is basically a 3-positional statement that makes some little statement of information. For example, Simon is a person is a triple. Simon works at Sintef is a triple. And on its own, each one is kind of, you know, not very useful. But once you start creating huge networks of thousands or millions of triples, you're able to express very complex knowledge and traverse that graph. So World Wide Web standards provide our foundation. Extending that, there are controlled vocabularies, which are basically a taxonomy that contains terms with a clearly defined and controlled meaning that act kind of like a dictionary. And ontologies are an extension of that include relationships between the terms to formalize knowledge about a domain in a machine readable way, kind of like a textbook. We can start to extend ontologies by linking them to real specific pieces of information. So whereas ontologies kind of describe the general concept, like a battery has an electrode or a battery has an electrolyte, a knowledge graph describes specific batteries and specific electrodes and specific materials that are able to be tracked and linked to other resources like data sets or tests. And finally, on top of that, our top layer is what we call linked data. And this is data sets that are semantically annotated and linked to other pieces of data, which may be, for example, like a battery cycling test, where the actual raw data is linked to a table schema that describes the quantities, or a node in the knowledge graph that describes the actual cell that was used, or the test procedure that was used to generate it. So it starts to bring data out of the realm of living in these isolated, closed off repositories or zip files, and starts to bring it into the World Wide Web, or into the semantic web, as a living resource, as something that machines can interact with and query and pull on an active basis. So ontologies, as we mentioned, are a formal description of knowledge about a domain that's understandable for both people and machines. And they've been extremely well developed, as we mentioned, for general knowledge. Probably the most widely used one, especially for Google or search engine optimization, is schema.org. And here you can see an example of how a person would be described in an ontology like schema.org. So we can create a general node that defines our person, and that person may have some data property that's like their name, a string. It may be linked to other nodes within the ontology or knowledge graph, like they have a nationality, which is a country, or maybe they're an athlete that participates in a sports team with a given name. So that kind of thing is very nice for doing search engine optimization, but we're interested in batteries. We're interested in electrochemistry. How can we do the same type of thing for our knowledge and for our information? And this is basically the role of the battery interface ontology, which is an extension of the EMMO, the Elementary Multi-Perspective Materials ontology, that tries to take the same approaches to describe not only the fundamentals of materials and components and cells, but also data and tests and that type of information. So for example, we can say an electrochemical cell has a positive electrode, which is some electrode that has an active material, some material, and that electrode maintains contact with an electrolyte, for example. So by expressing that knowledge in a formal and machine readable way, we open that not only for people to navigate and for people to query, but for agents to interact with and navigate autonomously. So the final kind of implementation, or the real vision of that, is not when it is just a kind of static resource that exists in its own repository or a code base that exists on your computer, but when it's actually integrated into the semantic web and linked with actual data sets. And we can see here a kind of instance of how that is implemented in general knowledge queries, especially for things like sports teams, which, data scientists apparently love sports. So there's a lot of good implementations of that. Where we can say, for example, Wayne Gretzky is a person that links to schema.org term for person and mapped to data sets which may be indexed in the NHL database, for example. So there is one exception to the rule, that it hasn't really been applied to great extent in scientific and technical domains, and that is the field of bioinformatics. because bioinformatics were extremely prescient about adopting these approaches very early on. All the way back in 1971, the Protein Data Bank was established, and they migrated to World Wide Web standards very early, already in the 90s. And throughout the 2000s, they really started to push standardization of data, semantic markup of results, and using ontologies and controlled vocabularies. And so when artificial intelligence tools really started to take off in power, the last 10 years or so, and AlphaFold, the DeepMind tool, was looking for good problems to try it out on. They already had 50 years worth of knowledge and 50 years worth of data on which to train it. So that activity won the Nobel Prize in 2024 and was made possible by these decades of vision and good implementation of digitalization policy in the field of bioinformatics. And so we can think about, well, what makes that different from other fields? Why has it been adopted there so early? And I think there's a few reasons. There's always been a lot of funding and support for digitalization and bioinformatics. And it is a little bit of a simpler scope, a simpler domain, because a lot of the activities that you see are focused on proteins or focused on genes. It's kind of a very directed scope. But if we want to start applying the same thing in material science domains, we face this challenge that material science is extremely diverse. It's not just, chemistry or physics or manufacturing, but it's everything. It's thermodynamics and testing and data management, and it starts to become a hugely broad and diverse set of knowledge that you have to conceptualize and formalize in a consistent way. And that requires a really well-grounded and flexible and logically consistent framework. And the domains must form stable links to be reusable across each other, because it's too much for any one domain to do on its own. And if you don't do that, if they exist independently or if they're kind of only loosely connected, then the whole thing starts to become wobbly and difficult to reuse. And so in our approach to do this for batteries, we are taking a kind of layered approach to try to make it feasible and to try to make it able to be reused and pulled from different domains. So as we mentioned, the EMMO is our top level ontology, and that sets the framework and the rules governing our activities. And that has the benefit that anything done within the EMMO framework that adheres to those recommendations is then interoperable and can be reused across domains. Has the downside that you then have to adhere to those rules, and it can be a little bit slow to get things adopted. But the ultimate power of having a broader community is very good. So we extend the fundamentals of EMMO with domains for chemical substances that describe, for example, the types of materials that are used in batteries. A domain for electrochemistry, which describes all of the elements that are fundamental to electrochemistry, not only for batteries, but also for fuel cells or corrosion or whatever. And finally, the top layer on that is the battery extension, which is our battery ontology. Good. So that kind of lays the foundation for how semantic technology is built up. And now we can start to see how this can be implemented in practice. And ultimately, as we've kind of mentioned, the goal here is to support autonomous working of complex tasks. So we as researchers or we as users may have some query like computer retrieve the results from discharging my CR2032 coin cell. And the agent then needs to be able to translate this into some sort of structured query and access and endpoint that they can use to start responding to that prompt. And in order to get there, we first have to traverse what we call a semantic layer. That, of course, includes our ontology to say, okay, what is a CR 2032 point cell? What is a discharging test? And find not only the general concepts that map those things, but then link them to specific instances and retrieve the specific ones that we're looking for from our knowledge graph, and link that with our linked databases, which may be something like a Zenodo instance or Kadi format instance, which is also kind of similar structure. So along this layer, we tend to mostly be researchers, and this starts to get outside of the scope of where researchers really feel comfortable working. So it is a team effort to really build these kinds of systems and make them sustainable. So in the middle, we have some developers who are responsible for building and maintaining a semantic layer, and data stewards who are responsible for making sure that the data that comes from our tests adhere to these recommendations and are able to be integrated into linked data systems and linked to our knowledge graph. So to demonstrate how that's done, we've created some kind of showcase examples to act as a example for the community. And this is a example from Zenodo, where we've discharged a CR 2032 coin cell and gone through the whole process of not only making it fair, but also integrating it into linked data systems and publishing that on Zenodo. And we'll go through the details in just a little bit about how exactly we did that and what needs to be considered. But I would just highlight two things. First, that there are fair checkers who can give you a score, so you can kind of track how fair your data is. And in this case, we got it above 90%. And I also wanted to highlight this bit because this is on its own, it's kind of a, it's not a very useful data set. We just bought a coin cell and discharged it to have something to work with. And I posted this on like 6 o'clock on a Saturday night. And within just a few hours of it being up, it had been downloaded like 100 times. And I think most of those were from machine agents. I don't think, like maybe there's a lot of battery nerds downloading data on Saturday night. I don't know, maybe. But I think it shows that even for this, relatively simple, not very useful data set, going the extra step to actually make it semantic, to actually integrate it into the semantic web, leads to much bigger impact and much broader distribution. So imagine, what it would be if it was actually a more extensive data set. It would be, much more. So when we think about what are the steps that we need to go through in order to bring our data into the semantic web and to make it accessible for these machine agents, we have a paradigm or a framework called the 5 stars of battery linked data. And we have a MOOC that's in preparation for that. Now we're trying to get it published through the Battery 2030 Plus website, and that should be available imminently. But basically, there's a few easy steps that we can go through in order to bring our data into this kind of active system. And the first is to save the test data in a file that is structured and open, so in CSV or Parquet or JSON formats instead of the raw binary file, and to post that data on the web. Now, you can use Zenodo, which is probably the most common repository for results from European projects, but also platforms like Bitmap Archive or Kadi format, which I know is very popular in Ulm, are also suitable platforms for that. The third step is to describe your data with semantic terms. And this is where we start to actually make the link between that specific raw data file and terms that exist in the ontology so that machines can understand that link and understand its meaning. And if you don't have a background in data science or computer programming, these kinds of metadata files may look a little bit intimidating at first, but I have good news. Two things. Number one, if you go through the actual pieces of it, you'll see that it's really simple statements that are just kind of compiled to make a long file. But the even better news is that there's a lot of tools that are in development right now to create an Excel interface or a Python interface, so you don't even have to worry about writing JSON-LD or understanding the meaning of these metadata files. But for now, it's a good thing to be aware of, because this is like the equivalent of HTML in websites for linked data. So fundamentally, these metadata files describe what is it that we're talking about. And in this case, we see that this is a battery test result and a data set. It contains information like, where can I download this file, with a link to the Zenodo instance, and what does the content mean, with a link to the table schema that maps the columns to ontology terms like voltage or current or temperature. So we can describe our actual data set with semantic terms so that machines can find it and understand it. But then we can actually link it to our other instances of metadata that maybe describe our cell, or maybe describe the test or the type of equipment that this was done on. So we can see here, this is a extension of that metadata file that says, how was this data generated? And we can see that was a battery test that had a task discharging. What type of cell was used? So you can see that test has test object, some CR2032 coin cell, with a specific image of that cell available in the Zenodo repository. What type of equipment was used? Biologic battery cycler. And what type of output did we have? That's our battery test result. So what can we do, or what does this start to open up when it's integrated? And we can kind of traverse the graph of options that an agent would have once it has access to the repository with that data. So if an agent comes across that Zenodo repository, they have access to the metadata, of course, and from the term mapping to the ontology, they can land back at the term in the battery interface ontology. And here we can see it's not only our human readable label and our machine readable identifier for that specific term, but it also contains links and mappings to other sources of information. And that, I think, is one of the real bits of power in using ontology terms. Interoperability is great, and providing all of the metadata that you need is great. But once these links are actually present, it just opens up such a bigger aspect of information beyond what you explicitly state. So for example, we can then trace that to the term for CR2032 in Wikidata and retrieve not only numerical quantitative information, like what's the diameter of a CR2032 cell, but also information about what it looks like and what its materials are. And from its materials and from the information in Wikidata, we can then extend that to the Google Knowledge Graph, where we can get information about, okay, the cell has manganese dioxide inside. Tell me where I can learn more about manganese dioxide. And that opens up a link to the PubChem database, where we have a lot more scientific information about manganese dioxide available and present. So it's on the one hand, great from a point of view of making data accessible and making it understandable. But I think it's even better that it also enables these links to other databases and being able to pull from a wealth of information, and not just what's explicitly stated. So battery semantic technology starts to open up a new world of possibilities for machine accelerated battery innovation. And with linked data implementations for not only these like tests and cells, but also materials and components and test procedures. We can start to leverage the power of AI and automated processing to get the most value from our data sets. So to start bringing things to a conclusion, we've talked a lot about agentic systems and agents and machines that work with our data. Just because I think that there's a lot of power in that if we can really open those systems. But it's important also not to forget the human factor, because humans, have probably the most knowledge and are some of the most creative agents who can work with that data. So a lot of these approaches, even though they're designed in the back end to support machine actions, can also support human actions. For example, one asset that we've been developing recently is the battery knowledge base, which is a kind of combination of a Wikipedia interface with a knowledge graph on the back end that contains links to the battery interface ontology and terms that exist there. And we can see, tracing a kind of similar chain that we just discussed, where we can go from Zenodo to the knowledge base to the battery interface ontology to Wikidata, where we have a lot of other information, links to the Google Knowledge Graph, for example. And yeah, I can learn about the materials that are included inside of that cell in a human accessible and human readable way. And ultimately point that back to not only information about the chemical structure and chemical identifiers like the NG key or the CAS registry number, but also the PubChem database for materials. And one other good aspect of linking things in this way is we've talked a lot about linking data and numerical data and technical data, but we can also start to create links between data sets and more, how should we call it, like community-driven things. For example, that this particular data set was featured in another lecture that I gave a few weeks ago. And you can find the slides available for that talk on the battery knowledge base. So you can start linking between test data sets and other knowledge-based resources. You can also link them back to the people who created that data set. So you make sure that that you always get credit for the data that you publish, and that you can promote the data sets that you have created to link them either back to your institution or back to your projects, and help to index information in that way. Good. So moving forward, what's the vision for the future? The background for what we've discussed is, I think I like to draw the analogy that it's like HTML to the web. Everybody posts things on the website. When was the last time you wrote HTML code? Probably a long time ago, because now we have really nice interfaces for doing that, for creating web content without actually having to write code. And we need the same thing for creating this kind of metadata markup for our battery data. So we have a few tools in preparation that help do that. One is a Python package called Cold that supports building linked data instances in a kind of familiar class-based Python interface, and using tools that we know and love, like Pydantic for doing validation. So in this case, this is a demonstration of how you can build a coin cell, again, CR2032 in Python using Cold, and it generates the metadata for you, the JSON-LD description for you, without actually having to do any of this yourself. And because we use the ontology as like our our single source of truth, everything in here is automatically generated. So if something changes in the ontology, then that is propagated through to the data model in Pydantic. And we can use that to do validation. In this case, we just tried to say that the diameter is 20 grams, and it's returning saying, hey, you need a length unit for that. So we can do hard validation for really fixed things like making sure the quantities of units and values match up. We can also do soft validation. For example, if we say that our cell has a case that is an electrode, it'll say, okay, well, I'll do it for you, but it's going to return this warning that the term has case should refer to a case instead of an electrode. So kind of moving in that direction, trying to make things easy to do in interfaces people already know, like Python, and then introducing built-in validation to help avoid making mistakes in metadata descriptions. There's also a lot of interesting work going on in kind of third-party development. This is an example of a Excel-based tool that they built at IMPA in Switzerland, and of course in Vitalia's group. And there they have a kind of standard data model that people can enter information in through Excel and have that parsed in the back end to create linked data JSON LD markup. Yes, won't go through the video. So right now, we're trying to focus a lot on doing community building and contributing to all of the documentation and the examples and the templates and the books and the papers that's really necessary to power these kinds of communities for a long time. And the battery knowledge base is one of the core resources that we're creating to help do that as a human readable source of knowledge. We're also looking into setting up some monthly community office hours to try to answer questions and discuss improvements in this approach. And currently, these are resources that are governed under the Battery 2030 consortium, which is their kind of project result owner. But we want to widen that formal governance structure to cover a wider group of stakeholders also within the community. Because teamwork makes the dream work. Yes. So, final thought, never before have we had access to so much battery data and the tools that we need to process it. And that opens up a lot of really interesting options for us in the research community. And semantic technology allows us to combine that power of AI machine processing with human intuition for a new generation of battery innovation. And if you're interested in learning more, you can always find additional resources here, BAT info, and I'll direct you to the EMMO repo for the domain battery ontology, which is replacing the Big Map repository for that to try to make it more long-term in the battery community. Also, the battery knowledge base and the battery knowledge base community on Zenodo, where you can find specific instances of such linked data. Great, thank you very much to the Battery 2030 project, who supports a lot of this work, to the European Union, who has funded it, and to our many contributors who've supported this in one way or another. As we mentioned, this is really too big for any one group or one person to do on their own, so we're very thankful for all the contributors.